I'm Sarah Fenske, and this is the 314. Every episode, we sit down with St. Louisans who know what makes this place tick. Together, we explore why things are the way they are and how we can make them better. This episode of the 314 podcast is sponsored by Stages St. Louis. Last month, State Senator Brian Williams finally revealed the worst-kept secret in politics. He's running for St. Louis County Executive, challenging fellow Democrat Sam Page. Senator Williams has a reputation as a guy who can work across party lines to get things done, and I enjoyed hearing about his childhood in North County, the big wins he was able to achieve in the Republican-dominated state capital, and his answer to a key question that voters will have to ponder. How would he approach the job differently from County Executive Sam Page? I think you may be intrigued by some of the ideas he shares, including one involving no less than Taylor Swift. Senator Brian Williams, welcome.
It's good to be on with you. Thanks for having me, Sarah.
So you're running for what to me feels like an awful job, St. Louis County Executive. Why do you want that job?
Well, I don't think it's more about me wanting the job. I think it's about recognizing what our region needs at this moment. And in Jefferson City, I've had an opportunity to do something that my mom has done my entire life, and that's wake up every day, work hard, and work with people that she may or may not like. And I found tremendous success working with people, finding solutions, and ultimately bringing results back to St. Louis County and ultimately the region. So it was a natural progression, and selfishly, I have an adorable 2-year-old, so it definitely wouldn't be a bad thing to continue to serve and be 10 minutes from my house.
Yeah, this puts you closer to home. You wouldn't have that bad commute. But to win this job, you're going to have to beat a fellow Democrat. Did you have any trepidation about, starting this Democrat on Democrat battle at a time when Democrats have so many big battles they have to fight?
Well, I never really looked at it from a standpoint of the person in office. I looked at it from my record, what I felt the region could use based on my experience, and most importantly, as a father, I think about what the future of our region should look like. And in my mind, it looks like collaboration. It looks like government being not just efficient, but folks really understanding and feeling that it's close to them, and most importantly, having a leader that can tell our story better. This is a place I've lived my entire life, and I'm always perplexed that people don't realize that it's the greatest place to live.
The greatest.
And we have so many people that leave, so many friends I'm sure that both of us have that have went off and thrive in other cities, yet they never think to come back to their hometown. And to have leadership that can not only ensure that government is working efficiently, have a record of being able to deliver bold results, but also tell our story and make people really want to live here, and smart folks who may not have went to high school here feel this is a place that they want to be.
So how do you tell that story about St. Louis? Like, there's so many of us trying to tell that story, and I feel like it can't break through. There's this perception, I think, both outside the region and inside the region, that we're headed in the wrong direction.
Well, I think the first thing is in Jefferson City, I made the pure case that some of the positive outcomes of St. Louis isn't partisan issues or partisan ideas. St. Louis makes up 45% of the GDP, meaning
of the state of Missouri.
Of the state of Missouri, meaning this region drives the economy for the entire state of Missouri. So I sat with different leaders from various parts of the state, various political parties, and made that case that if you invest in St. Louis, it's going to have a positive impact on the rest of our state. And that's what has allowed us to be able to take lead on securing well over $100 million back to this region, whether it's around public safety, whether it's enhancing higher education, advancing our workforce for tomorrow, creating opportunities of access to healthcare. Those things have been possibilities simply because of what St. Louis brings to the table. And I don't think we highlight that nearly enough.
You hear some Democrats say we can't work with Republicans right now, that it's impossible, that these are people who don't respect our values, they don't respect who you are or what you stand for. And yet you're somebody who's known as you work across the aisle. What has driven that for you when a lot of people are saying, no, we need to take a harder line here?
Well, I think about some of the things growing up that my mom had to focus on. My grandmother, for example, she was the first black woman to get an international appointment as an auto worker. And she retired from Chrysler. She worked there for over 30 years. And again, my mom and I are 19 years apart, and my grandmother stepped in quite a bit. And
Your mom was very young when she had you.
Yes, she was very young. And to this day, she's still my hero. And my grandmother stepped in so many different ways, and I just saw how hard they worked. They never allowed any obstacle to keep them from being able to provide for us and the rest of my family. So when I went to Jefferson City as a state senator, I was laser focused on ensuring that I carried that same attitude that was instilled in me from the day I was born. So I meet people where they are. I talk about their communities. I make sure I highlight the positive things about St. Louis. But most importantly, I tell my story. And my story is simply someone who comes from a region that has given me all the tools to be successful. And I believe that if we invest in it, you're going to continue to get model leaders, people that want to make their state better. And most importantly, I don't believe that St. Louis is even a competitor with surrounding communities. We're a competitor with the rest of the world. And as county executive, that's what I want our vision and our perspective to be.
You say that the St. Louis region gave you all the tools you need to succeed. And I'm thinking you were born in Ferguson. You know, your mom was a teenager. There's a lot of odds that are stacked against young black men. For you, this has worked out. But do you feel like we're giving young black men all the tools they need to succeed, that they're there and these men just have to take them?
Well, I think growing up in St. Louis, I was very fortunate to have people in my life that really nurtured me and supported me in a lot of ways, but there were also a lot of obstacles I had to overcome. You know, one of the most important pieces of legislation I worked on was police reform, and no one thought that would ever get done in a state like Missouri. And the reason I decided to work on it, Sarah, was simply because I recognized what happened in Ferguson, what happened in Minneapolis, what happened to George Floyd could have easily been me. And instead of carrying the perception of being that kid home from college that got pulled over in North St. Louis County for pretty much driving while black, I took that perception paired with the fact that I have family members like my uncle, who was a police officer. And he served 27 years on the St. Louis City Police Department. And if you notice, that's a very odd number in comparison to 25 or 30. Oh. And the reason he never did 30 was because my family was deeply concerned about his safety. So I understood immediately that it's a high-stress, very dangerous job. So having the perception of someone who has been profiled by police, having the perspective of a loved one potentially being injured or even killed in a very dangerous job, it allowed me to bring people together, like law enforcement, activists, progressive groups, concerned citizens, people that had a personal connection, like I did, to racial discrimination and racial profiling. And I said, how do we find a solution? And what we did was something that had never been done post-Ferguson, and that was we banned chokeholds. We created the strongest use of force database. We gave law enforcement tools to do their job well, like the execution of a warrant arrest, meaning if you get pulled over and you have a tail light out, you can now, not by law, have to arrest them and say, hey, could you get that taken care of? Because next time it may not be that simple. And then we also did something that I think is really important as you talk about with black men. We changed the expungement law. We made it easier to get your record expunged. And we both know that people make mistakes, and those mistakes shouldn't follow them for their entire life. So we were able to lower the timeline of getting or being eligible for an expungement for a nonviolent felony from 7 years to 3 years, and then for a misdemeanor, 3 years to 12 months. But it also gave judges some cover to not seem as if they were handing out expungements like candy, but almost embracing the reform that if we allow people a second chance, it'll put them on a trajectory to be model citizens.
And hearing you run through all the things that you were able to achieve in this bill, It is almost shocking to me to think you were able to get this through a Republican legislature. And this was just a couple years ago. The composition was not really different than what it is today. Was that story about your uncle, the policeman? I mean, that was key to maybe getting some of those doors open with your Republican colleagues?
Absolutely. And I remember meeting with a group of sheriffs from Southwest Missouri. And I remember one, he's kind of coming in this meeting a little riled up. He's anticipating there to be this gridlock. And, I've found so much success as a leader and as a person having low to no ego. And I know that this is a profession that tends to attract people with very high egos, but really humbling myself to the moment has really allowed me to really transcend through so many different negative wavelengths. And this gentleman, I know he came in with the expectation that we were going to pretty much kick his profession left and right. And yes, there is a subculture of bad people that have tainted the profession, and they need to be out of the business. And I make that clear every second of the day. But also, he asked me a really important question. He said, "Why is this so important to you?" And he had that same thing. "Why is this so important to you?" And I didn't take it as if he was angry with me, but he had his perception of why my reason for doing this. And I looked at him and I said simply, because what happened to George Floyd and countless others that we can't even name could have easily been me. And I believe that was the first time that issue had been humanized, where people sat in a room with someone and said, "Wow, there's someone I actually know that could potentially be the victim of a senseless death."
And that made him sort of take a step back.
It made him take a step back. And one thing I also did, Sarah, that I think is so important for leaders to do. As an elected leader, the inability to negotiate, the inability to understand in advance kind of what your threshold is and what the outcome should look like.
How far you're willing to go.
That is a very difficult thing for so many people, to walk in a room without having the validation of advocates, without having people speak for you as a leader. I made sure that as someone that went into elected office, that was something that I leaned in on. The ability to talk through tough things, the ability to be able to articulate what my feelings and thoughts are, but most importantly, understand the policy and how it impacts people. And we found great success over the years. And again, every issue isn't a slam dunk, but we were fortunate with that one.
Do you feel like with these kind of negotiations where you're looking into each other's hearts and souls, have there ever been times when you've gone too far and you've thought, man, I gave away a little bit too much there. I didn't hang on to where that line needed to be?
I will say there has been many times, and most of them come at the expense of rhetoric versus the process. Mm-hmm. And what people don't understand, for example, in the Missouri Senate, I mean, that's the only job I've had. I didn't serve as a state representative. So the bodies are night and day. Mm-hmm. And in the Senate, you have the filibuster, you have rules and procedures, you have so many different tools to slow down legislation. Mm-hmm. And what I've always done is I've always took pride in slowing things down, forcing my colleagues to read through the bill.
What a novel idea.
Forcing them to explain to me their when, why, and how, and not do it in a demeaning way, but very much like, hey, could you help me understand what this means? And what it does is strategically it buys you time, because you do know the body can't spend so many hours on something, and then you're not in a demeaning way, so they can't really figure out if you're trying to kill their bill or you're trying to genuinely understand what it is. And look, we'll leave that to we'll leave that to the imagination of the listener. But I enjoy slowing those things down and making sure the entire body know what these 100 and 200 and 300 page bills do and how they impact the people that we represent. But the other part too that I think was important is when I first came in, I just went around and I said, hey, tell me about your community. Tell me about your district. We have so many people in St. Louis that grew up in rural parts of the country, and they come here and people almost pretend as if those roots aren't relevant to who they are today. And they very much are. And I've met people who are Democrats, people who are Republicans, who grew up in rural parts of the country, very different than I did. And even though I may not know how to, ride a tractor, I very much have an appreciation for people that come from those communities and how they evolved to who they are today.
My guest today is State Senator Ryan Williams. He's running for St. Louis County Executive. And now just a quick word from our sponsor. Feel the earth move as a young songwriter discovers her destiny and writes the soundtrack of a lifetime. Stages St. Louis proudly presents the smash hit Broadway musical, Beautiful, the Carole King musical, showing September 19th through October 19th at the Kirkwood Performing Arts Center. Follow Carole as she writes chart-topping hits like Natural Woman, The Locomotion, and You've Got a Friend. Visit stagesstlewis.org or call 314-821-2407 to get your tickets now. And now, back to our conversation with State Senator Ryan Williams. And my guest today, of course, is State Senator Ryan Williams. We've been talking about his time in the legislature, been a senator, the first black male elected senator in Missouri in, I think, more than 20 years.
More than 20 years,
yeah,
yes.
Which is kind of a staggering statistic right there. But now you've got your eye on a different office, St. Louis County Executive. This is more of an executive role rather than a legislative role. There have been so many problems in the last few years with the county council and the county executive just being at loggerheads. And the fascinating thing about these arguments is they have defied party lines. It's not your typical American problem, Republicans versus Democrats. What do you think is the source of the problem in that relationship?
Well, I'll tell you, I look at it a little different. I think, what would I give to only have to work with 7 people from the same county that should care about the same issues in a nonpartisan government?
That sounds easier to you.
And yeah, absolutely. I've navigated the legislature, 2 chambers, 33 other senators, 163 members of the House. We have to get it through that process before you even talk about the governor's desk. To work with people from the same region that should care about the same county, that should care about the same issues, and in a nonpartisan government, meaning as much as I am proud to have been a progressive leader in the state, I very much recognize my scope and what the capacity of my office is. And I think resetting and helping people understand what their actual job is. And as county executive, my job is to simply do 3 things. Surround myself with the best and brightest people to ensure that government is operating efficiently every single day. There are thousands of employees in the county, and the county executive should have a team of people that know exactly what they do, how they do it, and the best way to do it, and the best people. And those are not political jobs. Those are apolitical subject matter experts that are coming in and doing exactly what they do best, and most likely could be doing somewhere else, but have chosen to do it and serve their community. In terms of the council, it is important as a leader, and I do this with regional leaders that I serve with, meeting them where they are, understanding the needs of their community. There has been so many things that I've delivered back to St. Louis and had to work in some element with the county, where there's $23 million for a public safety regional intelligence center, which is being now built in Maryland Heights. Clearly, there were members on the council that are Republican that were in full support of that, and we were proud to get that done to address a new facility that was named after Officer Antonio Ballantyne, who was killed in the line of duty. I was also proud to work with members in the northern part of St. Louis County to get funding to demolish Jamestown Mall, which had been an eyesore in North St. Louis County for over a decade. I mean, literally would catch on fire, and first responders would have to go out and put it out right in the middle of a community. Or in the Central Corridor, higher education and advancing our workforce is something that's very important to me. Not only is the University of Missouri St. Louis is the only public research institution in the St. Louis region, to think that it did not have its own engineering program until I secured the funding for them to now start that, as well as the Campus of the Future, which will allow their South Campus, which is about 36 acres of land, to now do some campus consolidation to get a patient healthcare facility and a grocery store anchor in the Normandy area of St. Louis County, which has been a food desert and has lack of access to healthcare for many, many years. These are things that I have been able to provide funding directly to St. Louis County, but also work with county government to ensure that it's happening. Now, it doesn't always happen on time, but I was very proud to do that, and it required some coordination and collaboration from the council.
So these are all really good things. I got to ask you a direct question here. How are you different than County Executive Sam Page?
I don't watch the other team practice, and I think the only person who does is Bill Belichick.
You're not paying attention to what's happening in St. Louis County?
I don't spend my time comparing myself to other people. I very much stay laser focused on what I bring to the table. And what I do know that I bring that I think every executive should do, and that's clearly leadership, the ability to collaborate, the ability to run a functioning government, the ability to not take taxpayers' money and utilize it in ways that does not benefit the region. I'll tell you two things that stood out to me. I was on a random walk, and that's how I know I'm getting old.
It's now your hobby. Yes.
I was on a walk.
Looking at birds.
Looking at birds. I live in University City, and I was on a walk. It's a very walkable community. And I thought about two things, Sarah. One, we went back on a special session, and we focused on two issues: recovery money, which we got about $100 million to the city of St. Louis for tornado efforts, which still isn't nearly enough, but it was still something. And I watched Mayor Kara Spencer do multiple briefings, and I watched them more just to kind of see what was going on and kind of understand as a state leader how we can continue to help a region that I very much care about. And as county executive, the city of St. Louis should be just as important to you as any other part of the region. And if the city of St. Louis is not thriving, that has an impact on St. Louis County, St. Charles County, Franklin County, and Jefferson County, and anywhere else in between, even the Metro East. And not one time did I see any St. Louis County leadership stand next to Kara Spencer during that crisis. Not one time.
And you would have been there.
Oh, 100%. You have to. And I'm sure Buzz Westphal would have been there. I'm sure other leaders would have been there, because this was arguably one of the probably the biggest crisis our region has ever seen. And we all know someone who was impacted. The second thing I would point out is we went to Jeff City, and we determined whether or not the state provides subsidies to keep the Royals and the Chiefs in Kansas City. Now, just being very open about it, I do not believe taxpayers should contribute money to billionaires or stadium subsidies. So I was a hard no on providing subsidies, because I just don't think that's appropriate. However, as the county executive, if they were thinking about leaving the state of Missouri and going to Kansas, as a fan of Taylor Swift, I would have gotten on the phone and talked to Clark Hunt, the owner of the Chiefs, and said, before you go to Kansas, consider coming to St. Louis County. And,
bold play.
Regardless of if it was a shot in the dark or not, it's for the world to see that we believe and we know that St. Louis deserves the best football team in sports, and we deserve one of the top artists, depending on who you're talking to, in the world.
So you feel like we should have made a play for the Chiefs?
I feel like we should always be telling our story better. We should always be collaborating, and we should always demand that our region have access to the best, whether that's the top companies, whether that's the top sports teams, whether that's the top people. Some of the brightest people in the world should want to live here. And if we could pack a stadium with baseball players running around with bananas on their hats, we can definitely accommodate the Kansas City Chiefs.
So not that I don't want to linger on this subject of trying to steal the Chiefs, because this is something I never thought of.
It would have been fun.
I'm fascinated. It would have been fun.
We don't want Kansas to have them, right?
Right, we don't, yeah. But you had mentioned just how important it was for the county and the city to be there together, that you would have been there with Kara Spencer. There are groups.
Regardless of personality, regardless of anything. During that crisis, any leader, it could have been anybody. hands down, St. Louis County should always be willing to collaborate with St. Louis City and surrounding counties under all costs.
So there was a big effort a few years back to try to merge St. Louis City and county together, or bring the city back in as a municipality of the county. There's some county residents that are trying to restart that. Do you support this idea of we need to come together, we're going to be better together as some sort of combined government entity? Or do you see that as a distraction at this point?
Well, I think it's more about who needs to be at the table with these type of conversations. So for your listeners, I represent a region. My Senate district takes in communities like Clayton and Ladue, Olivet, and then I go north through North St. Louis County. I take in communities like Ferguson, Florissant, Hazelwood, Bridgeton, Maryland Heights. So I have about 46 municipalities. They all have a mayor and a council person and an alder person. And I've been proud to work with all of them very well. And I recognize that all of those communities are not created equal. Some have very different challenges than others. With that being said, it is imperative that the community leaders be at the table whenever you're talking about a merger between the city and the county. However, I do believe that there should be regional cooperation when you think about intergovernmental entities like East-West Gateway. That should always be a strong reflection of regional improvement and partnership and collaboration. Bi-state, the St. Louis Partnership. I think St. Louis County should be working very close with entities like SLDC. One project I'm passionate about, I miss Susan Troutman dearly. I've been proud to get funding for Great Rivers Greenway to expand the brick line. I have a youth advisory board right now that's doing research on how to expand it from downtown St. Louis through North St. Louis County, and to be walkable and to be able to ride your bike, all those things I love to do. That requires collaboration throughout the region between the city and the county.
There already are these connections, you're saying. We don't necessarily need a UniGov in order to work together?
Well, the question is are those connections relevant when you have an easement and you have the county and the city both pointing at each other saying, who paid for it?
Right.
How come we both can't pay for it? How come there can't be a system in place that says, this is how we work through these things, and it's not about, I have a $50 million deficit in the county, which has to be figured out, or whether or not the city feels that they should use a surplus that they have in Rams money or something like that. Those things need to be figured out, and you have to have smart people that can work through those within county government as well as the city.
So I got to ask you one more question. You mentioned the Rams settlement funds. The county has already spent $51 million of its Rams settlement funds, and the state auditor recently came out somewhat critical of that, said there wasn't really thinking about what to do with this money. It's kind of felt like a grab bag. Do you think it's been a mistake to just let those go on smaller projects here and there rather than try to do something big?
Well, let's just go back to the point I made earlier. I was very intentional about how I utilize state funding as a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee, meaning for the past 6 years, or almost 7, I've been on a committee where I have to oversee balancing a budget that's far bigger than the counties. And the projects that I'm talking about, whether it's the Regional Intelligence Facility for Police to allow them to collaborate and address public safety, or the demolition of Jamestown Mall, or the transformative projects happening in North County in the Central Corridor with UMSL. Those were transformative projects that we were very intentional about. So my point is, as county executive, I will bring that same attitude to be a good steward of taxpayer dollars, but most importantly, identifying projects that ultimately move the needle and enhance the quality of life, not just of county residents, but make our region stronger in the process. So to answer your question, I think the county council and the executive's office should be focused on using that money towards transformative projects. And what does transformative mean? Advancing our workforce, addressing public safety, economic development, regional cooperation. I'm going to throw this in, selfishly, the arts, which I think is so important as someone who enjoys art. Those are just examples of things. People say infrastructure. And I really do not like the word infrastructure because nobody knows what it means.
Right.
And I sit in meetings all the time and they say infrastructure, and I raise my hand and they're so confused. Like, why is the senator raising his hand? And I say, what does it mean? And
you want specifics.
So, infrastructure. If you walk down the street and your sidewalk is facing the sky, and it's almost safer for my 2-year-old son and I to walk in the middle of the street than the sidewalk. Yes, that's an infrastructure problem. Or if someone yells your name at the end of your street and the street lights are so dim because they haven't been replaced in years that you can't even see who's yelling your name at the end of your street. That's infrastructure. And, I know there's been this whole debate about potholes. I'm not even going to get into that. But my point is that that has to be a primary focus. And I think there's just been so many things on county government's level that has been distractions that has really taken the body collectively, meaning the elected body, from really doing the people's work and focusing on what moves the needle for the region.
So one last question here today. Speaking of distractions, the county executive is now facing criminal charges. A lot of people see this as this politically motivated thing coming from a Republican attorney general trying to get in with Donald Trump. But it is this looming thing for the county executive. Do you think he needs to step down while this is pending?
Well, again, I think it's just a distraction, and I'm not going to allow it to distract me. I'm very much focused on what I can control, and that's ensuring that my record is before voters and making a case on why I will be the next and the best next county executive. And again, in terms of issues, I always put myself in the situation. And I can tell you right now, if I was to be indicted of any crime, my mother and grandmother would be deeply concerned, period. And I think that personally, I don't think it's my place to kick a person or make a prediction about what someone should do. But I very much am laser focused on what I can do in terms of getting my record in front of people next year, August of 2026.
State Senator Brian Williams, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on today.
And now for the closer. The big news in St. Louis County last week was that an alleged cult relying on forced labor and human trafficking had been busted. Federal prosecutors filed felony charges against 2 key leaders of the Kingdom of God Global Church. And the indictment specifically referenced several homes in Chesterfield and one in Wildwood being used by this church as places to exploit and abuse people. Both the bust and its local connection surprised a lot of people, but not my colleague Ryan Krull. He had been covering this issue and neighbors' fears about these sites for years now, and he joins me now. Ryan Krull, welcome.
Yeah, hey, good to be here. It's a wild story.
It is indeed. How did you first get interested in the Kingdom of God Global Church?
Yeah, well, this was one of those just kind of fall into your lap. Back in 2022, when I was working for the Riverfront Times, someone just emailed me and said, hey, this mansion that used to be owned by Nelly is currently owned by a cult.
I imagine that email got your attention immediately.
Yeah, it seemed too good to be true, I'll be honest. But it's very easy to check who owns a property in St. Louis County. And sure enough, it said Kingdom of God Global Church. They were listed in the owner, they were listed as the owner of that address. And I thought, oh, okay, maybe there's something here. And yeah, just kind of one thing led to the other. They owned a lot of properties around town, and pretty much uniformly, all of their neighbors had some strange stories.
Yeah, so what did you learn from these neighbors?
Yeah. So this wasn't so much the Nelly mansion, let's be clear, because that was vacant by the time the tip came my way. But they owned a bunch of properties in Chesterfield. Yeah, and neighbors said that they had long suspected something was going on here. And it was all kind of anecdotal on the one hand. There was things like there was just a ton of trash being generated at these houses, way more than like a family would create. There were sort of deliveries of pallets of water. There was comings and goings at odd hours, that kind of thing.
So it wasn't just a family. There was some sort of operation.
Clearly, yeah, there was an operation going on here. And then there was other stuff that wasn't anecdotal, that was a little more buttoned up. For instance, there had been a municipal case involving one of the properties, and a piece of evidence in that case was a letter from a contractor who said, yeah, I went in there, and there was like bunk beds in the garage. They were asking me to do all these weird renovations for a private residence. And I said, like, I can do it, but I'm going to have to pull some permits. And once he mentioned pulling permits, they just basically kicked him out of the house. So it's like, if you kind of took away the red flags, there would have been nothing left.
I think one of the other things that you'd mentioned was there was something about people standing guard.
Oh, yes.
That kind of felt chilling to me.
Yeah, so there was one house in particular on Wild Horse Meadow Drive. How is that for a Chesterfield street name? Yeah, and the neighbors were just like, all the neighbors of all these properties were curious, but I think the Wild Horse Meadow Drive neighbors were sort of the most kind of active in their like little investigations, which I totally love. And yeah, one guy in particular I talked to said he would try to kind of peer in, like if a door was open, he would, walk his dog in such a way to kind of see what was going on.
That's a reporter's dream.
Yeah, I know, it was such a good source. And he said that he could kind of look in and he saw like a bunch of computers and that kind of thing. And then, yeah, eventually they started kind of posting a guy. Maybe on the one hand he was hanging out, but he sure looked like he was kind of standing guard by these doors. And I guess what was surprising was ultimately the indictments that came down last week accused this cult, alleged cult, I guess you should say, of running these call centers. And the neighbors I talked to were saying things like 3 years ago that it sure looks like a call center in there because there was rows of computers and stuff like that, and everyone has an idea of what a call center looks like. So yeah, then I guess the Chesterfieldians, they cracked this one before the FBI did.
Yeah, every now and then we give nosy neighbors a bad name.
Yes.
But not only are they great journalistic sources, but in this case, they were onto what the FBI says was exploitation of people that was really kind of harrowing.
Yeah.
And this all comes from this guy, this church leader, who, as you sort of pieced together a few years ago, this guy wasn't exactly your typical pastor.
No, he didn't. He instantly failed the sort of sniff test, I guess. Yeah, his name's David E. Taylor. He's from Memphis, and his whole MO was that he ran a 24/7 dream interpretation line where you could call in and you have your dreams interpreted.
And here's where the call centers come into play.
Exactly.
He's staffing it with people, now we know, working against their will.
Exactly, yeah.
Wow.
And he was broadcasting live on Facebook. I mean, a lot of it was on a loop, but you could watch him 24/7 essentially. And he would encourage you to call into one of these centers and have your dreams interpreted for a nominal fee, of course. And then also kind of parallel to that, he was having these call center workers. He would force them to basically cold call, send cold Facebook instant messages to people trying to solicit donations from them. And he set these like grueling quotas of money that he was demanding these people brought in, and if they didn't meet basically these impossible demands, he would withhold food, withhold sleep. Really, harrowing conditions.
So it can be really hard for the government, like the line between a church and a cult. It seems so simple, but it's not.
Yeah.
I know from having read a lot about Jonestown, one of my great obsessions.
Oh, yeah.
The government tried to stop that for so many years before the terrible events that happened.
Yeah.
In this case, does it feel like they've got a pretty strong criminal case here?
Well, you're totally right about were these people, if you're brainwashed, I mean, are you being coerced?
Or if you're just a true believer.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
Religion relies on a certain level of faith.
That is true. Well, one thing that does not rely on faith is taxes. So your points are all very well taken, but over the past 10 years, these call centers brought in about $50 million. And the indictment says that they were not, surprise, surprise, they were not paying taxes on that money. So I think he's probably in hot water.
This could be an Al Capone type situation.
Yeah.
They only have to get him on one big thing.
Exactly. And I think it's worth mentioning, too, how he was spending this money. It was just such like a, for lack of a better term, gauche way of spending $50 million. McMansions, jet skis, a boat, several bulletproof cars.
So you wrote at one point they own 12 properties in the St. Louis area. Seems like most of them in West County. Do we know if they still have these real estate holdings in the area?
Well, a lot of them they've divested themselves of, but at least one, on Tim Page in Chesterfield, they do own. And this was one of the properties I remember I visited back in the day, and it generated fewer neighborhood complaints than the others just because it was so far recessed from the street. It was kind of in this heavily wooded area. It was actually kind of difficult to even get to. I can see why they, picked it. It was behind a big fence. That is one that they still definitely own, according to county assessor records. And others, I'm not sure. It's a little kind of more murky. They're in the names of other people. Maybe they still hold them. Maybe they don't. But they at least still have one real estate holding here. And I really wonder, the status of that property now that the leaders of this organization are behind bars.
And I got to ask one last question here, because what originally caught your attention here, and frankly, what has made a lot of people interested in this story who don't have obsessions with cults, is the Nelly angle.
Oh, sure, yes.
So did they still own this kind of crumbling Wildwood mansion once owned by Nelly?
Yeah, no, they don't. And I gotta say, I feel a little bit bad that everyone refers to this as the Nelly cult. Well, really, Nelly has absolutely nothing to do with this. He just used to own a mansion in Wildwood next to Hidden Valley, and they purchased it. So he's very
He's innocent.
Exactly. So in other parts of the country, this is definitely not referred to as the Nelly cult, but here in St. Louis, that's what we're calling it.
Well, Ryan, I appreciate you clearing that up. St. Louis Magazine staff writer Ryan Krull, thank you.
Yeah, happy to chat.
I'm Sarah Fenske, and that's the 314 for today. You can find out more in our podcast show notes and at stlmag.com. You can also find me and Ryan every day in your inbox. That's thanks to St. Louis Magazine's fantastic free newsletter, St. Louis Daily. It's a fresh take on St. Louis with insight and original reporting. You don't want to miss these stories. A Nelly cult that has nothing to do with Nelly. You can sign up at stlmag.com/newsletters. The 314 is a production of St. Louis Magazine. I'm Sarah Fenske, and this is the 314. See you next time.